The stars stretched infinitely in every direction, a silent ocean of blackness speckled with cold, distant fires. Deep in this endless abyss, a single transmission pulsed, a call from the past, lost in the tides of time. The distress signal had been traveling for centuries. A desperate plea sent from a forgotten colony, its message encoded in the simplest terms. Emergency. No supplies, no escape, send help. No one should have been listening anymore. The colony was long assumed dead, lost to the unforgiving realities of deep space settlement. But fate had other plans. Aboard the Orion's Wake, a mid-range deep space exploration vessel, the crew wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. Their mission was routine: survey distant systems, update outdated star charts, and search for habitable worlds. Captain Elias Voss, a hardened explorer with a streak of stubborn curiosity, stared at the decoded transmission on the ship's main display. A distress signal? Out here? Commander Naomi Harlow, the ship's second-in-command, leaned closer. "It's been repeating for at least 300 years, said Lieutenant Aaron Kova, their communications officer. "I almost missed it. The signal is ancient, buried under cosmic noise." Voss frowned. "Who sent it?" Kova worked his console, fingers flying over the holographic interface. "Cross-referencing. Got something. It matches a lost human colony. Designation: Persephone's Descent. Last known transmission from the colony was 312 years ago. Official records list it as a failed settlement. No survivors." Silence settled over the bridge. Everyone knew what that meant. The odds of anyone still being alive were near zero. Harlow folded her arms. "That signal shouldn't still be active." "And yet it is," Voss murmured. He turned toward his navigator, Lieutenant Marcus Renner. "How far?" 86 light years, Renner replied. "We can reach it in 4 days if we divert from our current course." The weight of the decision pressed down on them. Protocol dictated they log the signal and move on. Humanity had lost hundreds of colonies over the centuries, and this was just another ghost among the stars. But something about this felt wrong. Voss exhaled slowly. "Set a course. We're going to find out who or what is still calling for help." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but no one argued. Moments later, the Orion's Wake adjusted its trajectory, its powerful sublight engines burning against the void as it headed toward the lost world. As the ship surged forward, the signal continued its endless loop, a forgotten voice calling from the depths of time. Someone had sent an SOS. No one had expected an answer, but now humanity was coming. The Orion's Wake surged through the void, a lone vessel cutting across the silent, ancient dark. Inside, the hum of the ship's core filled the corridors with an artificial heartbeat. Steady, constant, familiar. But there was nothing familiar about what lay ahead. Captain Elias Voss stood on the bridge, watching the incoming data scroll across the displays. The distress signal remained unchanged, its transmission looping every 30 seconds, repeating the same desperate call for help. A relic from another time. It had been 3 days since they changed course. 3 days of anticipation, of questions without answers. The crew of the Orion's Wake had seen derelict stations before, wrecked colonies, the hollow remains of human expansion. But this was different. Commander Naomi Harlow entered the bridge, her uniform crisp, her expression unreadable. "We're close," she said, stepping up beside Voss. He nodded, but didn't look away from the display. "What are the scans showing?" "Preliminary readings are strange," she admitted, adjusting the interface. "The planet should be barren. No records indicate any sustainable biosphere, and the colony was assumed lost due to total system failure." Voss turned to her. "And yet?" She hesitated, then tapped the display. "Sensor anomalies, subsurface heat signatures, and something else." He leaned in. On the screen, subtle distortions rippled through the long-range sensor readouts. A signature, something faint but unmistakable, hidden beneath the normal planetary noise. "Artificial structures," she murmured. A chill ran through him. That colony was supposed to be dead. It should have been nothing but ruins, dust, and the ghosts of its past. Who the hell's been keeping the lights on? The final approach was tense. The planet loomed ahead, shrouded in thick cloud cover, its surface a muted ochre against the vastness of space. The storm systems were erratic, violent winds cutting across the terrain like scars. Lieutenant Marcus Renner, the ship's navigator, adjusted their course as the wake dropped from interstellar speed. The ship's hull vibrated under the shifting gravitational pull, stabilizers engaging to counteract the sudden drag. "Entering orbit," Renner announced. Voss exhaled. "Give me a visual." The forward display flickered, rendering an image of the surface. What they saw wasn't what they expected. The colony was there, but it wasn't a graveyard. From high orbit, they could see remnants of the original settlement. The skeletal remains of prefabricated habitats stretched across the terrain, weathered and broken. But interspersed among them were new structures. Strange, angular designs, unfamiliar materials glinting under the weak light of the distant sun. This wasn't just a dead colony. Something had built on top of it. The bridge was silent. Voss felt the weight of the unknown pressing against them. The distress signal still pulsed from below, a beacon calling them toward a mystery centuries in the making. "Atmospheric composition?" he asked finally. Lieutenant Arenkova ran the scan. "Thin oxygen, but breathable with assistance. Temperature fluctuations are severe, and radiation levels suggest long-term exposure isn't safe without shielding." "Life signs?" Another pause. Kova's fingers danced across the console. "Nothing conclusive. There's interference, some kind of field disrupting our scans. Could be natural, but..." Voss didn't need him to finish the thought. "I want a landing team ready in 1 hour, he ordered. "Harlow, you're with me. Kova, Renner, and Dr. Ellis, too." "We don't even know what's down there," Harlow pointed out. Voss glanced, back at the screen. The ruins of Persephone's descent sprawled beneath them like the bones of some forgotten beast, half buried by time, half claimed by something else. That's what we're going to find out. The shuttle touched down at the edge of the ruins, kicking up a cloud of dust and debris. The air shimmered with residual heat from the ship's thrusters, the ground beneath them cracked and dry. The team disembarked, their boots crunching against the ancient earth. Voss took the lead, weapons slung across his chest, his helmet's HUD scrolling data in real time. The air was thin but breathable, the wind carrying the scent of something metallic, something unnatural. The ruins loomed ahead. The original colony structures were exactly what they expected: broken, abandoned, left to rot in the passage of time. But the other structures, the ones that shouldn't be there, were something else entirely. Dr. Ellis, the team's xenoarchaeologist, approached the nearest structure, running a scanner along its surface. The material was smooth, dark, seamless, unlike anything humans had ever used. "This isn't ours," she murmured. Harlow turned to Voss. "Someone else came here after the colony fell." A faint sound echoed through the air, a low, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat, but mechanical. Voss raised a hand, signaling the team to stop. "Kova, get a reading." Kova adjusted his scanner. "It's coming from beneath us." Ellis stepped back from the strange structure, her brow furrowed. "I think this is just the surface level. There's something underneath." Then, without warning, something moved in the shadows. A flicker of motion, a shape just at the edge of their vision, slipping between the ruins like a ghost. Voss gripped his weapon. "Did you see that?" Harlow nodded. "We're not alone." The distress signal still pulsed. The ruins stood silent, and somewhere, in the darkness of a lost colony, something was watching them. The wind whispered through the ruins, carrying with it the eerie remnants of a world that should have been long abandoned. Captain Elias Voss crouched beside a crumbling wall, scanning the shadows where the movement had flickered just moments before. The others stood frozen, weapons raised, waiting. But nothing moved. "Kova, anything on sensors?" Voss asked, voice low. Kova frowned, tapping rapidly on his wrist scanner. "Negative. Whatever it was, it's not showing up on infrared or motion tracking." "It was there," Harlow muttered. "We all saw it." Voss nodded, His gut told him the same thing. There was something here with them. The distress signal hadn't been a ghost in the machine. Someone, something, had sent it. He turned back to Ellis, who was still examining the alien structures. "How old do you think these buildings are?" Ellis hesitated. "Hard to say without deeper scans, but centuries at least. They weren't here when the colony was abandoned." "Someone built over the ruins. Someone," Harlow echoed, eyes narrowing. "But not us." "No," Ellis confirmed. "Not us." A sudden, sharp click sounded from deeper within the ruins. The team turned as one, weapons raised. Voss motioned for them to move, slow and steady, toward the source of the noise. The dust kicked up around their boots. The faint hum of their breathing filters the only sound in the still air. Then, ahead of them, a door, one of the alien structures, slid open. It wasn't a malfunction. It wasn't a collapse of time-worn material. Something had opened it. Voss held up a fist, halting the team just outside the threshold. The interior of the structure was dark, impossibly so, as if the light itself refused to enter. "Renner, give me a drone." The lieutenant stepped forward, pulling a small reconnaissance drone from his belt. With a flick of his wrist, the device activated, hovering silently into the entrance of the alien structure. Its tiny lights illuminated a long, sloping corridor, the walls lined with faintly glowing patterns that pulsed in slow, rhythmic waves. Then, before anyone could react, the drone's feed cut out. A sharp pop of static filled their comms. And then, a voice, not a recording, not a message loop, a voice whispering through the radio. "You came," Ellis gasped. "That's English!" Harlow's grip tightened on her weapon. "Who the hell is that?" Voss took a step forward. "This is Captain Elias Voss of the Orion's Wake. Identify yourself." Silence. Then, we waited. So long. The whisper was weaker now, fading like a breath on the wind. And then the doors slammed shut behind them. The darkness swallowed them whole. Voss barely had time to react before the structure's interior was completely sealed. No light from outside, no visual feeds from their helmets, only the pulsing glow of the strange patterns on the walls, faint and hypnotic. Kova cursed, his scanner flickering wildly. "Something's jamming our signals!" Renner pulled at the door, but it wouldn't budge. "Captain, we're trapped." Harlow raised her rifle, aiming into the corridor. "We're not alone in here." A soft shuffle echoed through the passage. A sound like footsteps, barely perceptible, as though whatever was moving wasn't quite touching the ground. Voss activated his helmet's emergency beacon, but even that was scrambled. Then the voice returned. "We are still here. You must listen." It was closer this time. Not from the radio. From inside the corridor. A shadow moved within the pulsing glow of the alien markings. A figure. Tall, thin, almost human in shape, but wrong. Too long-limbed. Its movements were hesitant, unsteady, as though it had forgotten how to walk. It stepped forward. Voss and his team raised their weapons. "Don't be afraid," Ellis gasped. "Captain, look at its suit." Voss's eyes narrowed. The thing was humanoid. Its form wrapped in a suit that, beneath the dust, beneath the damage, was unmistakably human. A patch on its shoulder, barely legible, bore the faded emblem of the Persephone's descent colony, the lost settlers. They hadn't all died, but if they had survived, what had they become? The figure stood there, unmoving. Its breathing, if it even breathed, was eerily silent. The dim, pulsing light from the walls cast flickering shadows over its long-limbed frame, distorting its shape. Voss's instincts screamed at him to stay on guard. His grip on his weapon tightened, but he didn't fire. "Not yet. Identify yourself," he ordered, voice steady despite the tension gripping his chest. The figure twitched, as if struggling to remember how to move. Then, slowly, it raised an arm, pale fingers curling as if reaching for something just out of grasp. "We were the first," the voice rasped. "Persephone's crew, but changed. Too long." Ellis sucked in a sharp breath. "Captain, it's them." Harlow shook her head. That's impossible. Persephone's descent was lost over a century ago. There were no survivors. But the figure, no, the survivor, took a step forward, the dust swirling around its feet. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet held up by invisible strings. And yet, there was something undeniably human about it. The signal, Kova muttered. It wasn't automated. They sent it. The survivor's head tilted sharply at that, as if recognizing the words. Not all survived. Not all remained. It hesitated. We called for help. But no one came. A cold weight settled in Voss's chest. 100 years. A century of waiting. Of isolation. But if some of the Persephone's crew had survived, how? And then the figure spoke again. They changed us. The Watchers. They are coming. A deep vibration suddenly shook the ground beneath their feet. The pulsing glow of the walls intensified, the rhythmic patterns shifting into something erratic, frenzied. A low hum filled the air, an almost electrical charge sending a chill down Voss's spine. Captain, Renner said, backing toward the sealed door, I really don't like this. Voss didn't either. Who are the Watchers? He demanded. The survivor shuddered. Masters of silence, architects of the void. We were their experiment. And then it turned its head sharply, as if hearing something beyond their range. Too late. They know you are here. A thud echoed. Through the structure, deep and distant. Then another. Something massive was moving. The survivor recoiled, stepping back into the darkness. You must run. Or become like us. A final whisper, before it faded, retreating into the shadows. Then the walls split open. Not like doors. Not like anything built by human hands. The structure itself seemed to unravel, shifting and twisting, revealing an impossible space beyond. A place that had no right to exist. Black void interwoven with shifting, unnatural geometry. And within that impossible space, something watched. Not with eyes, not with form, but with an overwhelming presence that made Voss's thoughts feel too loud, as if his very existence had been noticed, and whatever was looking at them, it was coming. The world lurched. It wasn't a tremor, not in the traditional sense. This was something deeper, something that unsettled reality itself. The walls of the structure shimmered as if they weren't entirely solid anymore, the alien geometry bending at unnatural angles. Move. Now! Voss barked. The team snapped into motion, adrenaline overriding their paralysis. Renner had already turned, sprinting toward the passage they had come from. Ellis grabbed Kova by the arm, dragging him forward as the younger scientist hesitated, staring into the impossible void beyond the walls. Ellis, don't! Kova gasped, but she yanked him back just as a shape began to emerge from the shifting darkness. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't even a presence that could be understood in the way the human brain was wired to comprehend. It was a void given purpose. A tier in existence, outlined by faint, pulsating strands of something that resembled living circuitry. And behind that veil, something vast stirred. A whisper brushed against Voss's mind, a voice that wasn't a voice at all, but an impression, a hollow recognition that something new had arrived. We have found you. Voss's head pounded as if the words had shaken inside his skull. He pushed forward, forcing himself to focus. We need to get back to the ship. Now. They ran. Behind them, the passage they had entered through was no longer a passage. It was shifting, warping, the structure rearranging itself to prevent their escape. The walls pulsed, the very floor rippling under their feet like disturbed water. Renner was the first to reach the corridor leading back to the surface, but the instant he did, something reacted. A crackling burst of energy surged through the walls, slamming into him with the force of a shockwave. His body seized as he was lifted off the ground, held in midair as his limbs jerked involuntarily. His scream was a choked, gurgling sound, his form fading, distorting as if something was rewriting him. Voss didn't think. He fired. The pulse, rifle's discharge struck the energy tendrils wrapped around Renner, severing them for a brief second. Renner hit the ground hard, coughing violently, his skin pale and slick with sweat. Ellis grabbed his arm, pulling him up. Go! 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 They didn't stop. Every step felt heavier. The pressure inside their heads was growing. Something was trying to reach them, to pull them back. The walls trembled as more fissures of darkness spread. Something on the other side, pushing through. The Watchers. Voss's breath came in ragged gasps as the surface exit finally came into view. The towering chasm above them. The sky. A sky that was now wrong. The stars had shifted. The constellations unrecognizable. Time itself had warped. Their ship, the Argosy, was still there, its beacon blinking in the distance. A lifeline. Kova stumbled, his knees buckling. Ellis hauled him up without a word. The whisper returned. You were not meant to leave. Voss clenched his jaw. Yeah? Watch me. They sprinted for the ship. The ramp was already lowering. Harlow, still aboard, had seen them coming. Get inside, she shouted over comms. Voss shoved Renner forward. Kova, then Ellis. As he turned back, he saw it. The fissure in the temple had widened. The impossible. Space within had spread, and now, there were figures emerging. Not like the survivor. Not like humans at all. They moved without motion, shifting between distances without crossing the space between. Their elongated forms were wrapped in that same unnatural glow, their featureless heads tilting as if observing. But Voss felt it. They weren't looking at them. They were studying them. Voss! Ellis's voice snapped him out of his trance. He tore his gaze away and bolted up the ramp, slamming the override on the controls. The ship's engines roared to life, and as the Argosy lifted off, the last thing Voss saw was the shifting temple collapsing in on itself, swallowed by the void. The stars flickered, and the Watchers remained. The Argosy shot into the atmosphere, its thrusters burning hot against the alien sky. Inside, the crew staggered into their seats, adrenaline still surging through their veins. Voss slammed into the command chair. Harlow, get us into orbit, now! She was already ahead of him, hands flying across the controls. Engines at full burn, plotting a course. Wait, something's wrong. Voss turned sharply. What? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tapped several commands into the ship's interface, her brow furrowing deeper with each passing second. Navigation's off. Off. How? Renner rasped. He was still pale, his body trembling from whatever had touched him back in that cursed ruin. Harlow exhaled sharply. The star positions don't match. Our charts, our exit route. It's wrong. Voss's gut twisted. Clarify. She turned in her chair, her face grim. We're not where we were. Silence. No one spoke for a moment, the weight of her. Words sinking into their bones like cold iron. Ellis swallowed hard. You mean? We're not just in a different orbit, Harlow interrupted. I mean, the system doesn't match our logs. The stars aren't where they should be. The ship trembled slightly as it broke free of the last wisps of atmosphere, entering the black expanse of space. Voss turned to Kova. Scan for local beacons. Anything. Find our position. The scientist nodded shakily and set to work, his hands flying over the console. A few agonizing seconds passed, then, his face drained of color. Captain. His voice was barely above a whisper. We're not in our system anymore. Renner groaned. Oh, come on. No, you don't understand. Kova's hands curled into fists. We're not in our system. We're not even in a known system. A chill swept through the cabin. Voss felt his throat go dry. That's impossible. Kova shook his head violently. There's no radio traffic, no beacons, no known celestial markers. We're in uncharted space. Ellis exhaled sharply, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. How? We just took off. There's no way. Renner muttered something under his breath, rubbing his arms as if he were cold. They did this. No one needed to ask who. Voss clenched his fists. The Watchers, the things inside that structure. They hadn't just been trapped inside a ruin. They had been waiting for something like this. The ship's comms crackled. Suddenly, every console flickered. A deep, inhuman frequency thrummed through the hull, shaking the air inside their lungs. A message. Not in words. Not in any known language. A warning. Ellis shot up. "Shut it off! Shut it off now!" But before anyone could react, the forward viewport blinked. Not in the way glass should. Not in the way light should behave. It collapsed. For an instant, a fraction of a moment, the universe outside their ship folded, like a thin sheet of reality being pulled aside. And beyond it, Voss didn't know if his brain understood what he was seeing. Something moved in the void. Something vast. Something that had been there the whole time. A presence that had no shape, no form, just a whisper that brushed against the edge of his consciousness. A vast and unknowable intellect observing them. The ship's systems died. Lights flickered out. Consoles went dark. No alarms. No emergency backups. Just silence. Then, a voice. "You have trespassed." It wasn't sound. It wasn't even something heard. It was placed inside them, directly into their minds. "We answered because you called." The pressure inside Voss's skull was unbearable. Kova gasped, clutching his head. Renner slumped in his chair, shaking. "Your kind was not meant to come here." The dark beyond the viewport shifted. Something loomed. Something impossible. And for the first time in his life, Voss understood what it meant to be truly insignificant. The Argosy hung lifeless in the void, surrounded by an abyss that defied explanation. The vast, unknowable presence loomed just beyond the shattered veil of reality, watching, waiting. The crew barely breathed. Voss forced himself to move, to think. But every thought felt like it was being heard, measured, dissected. The voice, if it could be called that, rippled through their minds again. "You have touched what was sealed. You have seen what was hidden." Renner let out a choked sob. He was still clutching his arms, rocking slightly. "We didn't mean to. We didn't. Intention does not matter. Only consequence." Voss clenched his jaw. "If we've trespassed, let us go. We didn't come here on purpose." Silence. Then, a pulse of something vast swept through the ship, a force that made every nerve in their bodies scream. Not pain, not fear, something worse. Understanding. In that moment, Voss knew. They had been called across the stars, not by chance, not by accident, but because something had wanted them here. The signal, the ruin, the watchers. They weren't just responding to an SOS. They had been testing humanity, and humanity had failed. Harlow gritted her teeth, her fingers twitching over dead controls. "Voss, if we don't do something now," he knew. But what could they do? The ship was crippled. The void beyond them was shifting, thinking. The presence that surrounded them was deciding. Kova gasped suddenly. His voice was raw. "It's a prison." Everyone turned. He looked up, eyes wild. "The place we found. The Watchers. They weren't guarding something." His breath hitched. They were trapped. A pause, a slow, horrible realization. Ellis whispered. "And we let them out." The ship shuddered. The blackness outside moved. Something enormous, something beyond all comprehension began to unfold. And then, for the first time, the voice changed. It was no longer cold, no longer distant. It was angry. "You were warned." The void collapsed inward. Voss felt his lungs freeze, his mind buckle under the weight of something infinite. The ship screamed, metal groaning, reality twisting. And then, a flash, a pulse, a return. The Argosy dropped back into normal space. The stars, real stars, shone outside the viewport. The ship's systems flickered back to life, struggling, gasping like a drowning man breaking the surface. They were home. But something was wrong. Voss inhaled sharply, his heart hammering against his ribs. The distress signal, the one that had led them here in the first place. It was still broadcasting. Not from the ruins. Not from some forgotten world. From them. From the Argosy itself. A loop. A trap. A warning. And somewhere, in the depths of space, something listened, something answered.